It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, former Cabinet Minister and Conservative MP Liam Fox, Shadow Housing Secretary Lucy Powell, Spectator Editor Fraser Nelson and Daily Mirror Political Editor Pippa Crerar. Today, a Queen's speech with a promise to build more houses. Can it turn generation rent into homeowners?
My government will strengthen the economic ties across the Union, investing in and improving national infrastructure.
Will spending money north of the border persuade Scots to stay in the United Kingdom? Also today.
Good news, good team, great people.
Is it peace in our time in the Labour Party? So, the Queen has been outlining the government's legislative programme for the coming year and has talked about 30 laws that ministers intend to pass. When it comes to social care, though, it just said proposals on social care reform will be brought forward. No mention of a specific bill. Let's pick up with one of our guest papers, Pippa's Daily Mirror. They have actually underlined the fact that we're still waiting, Prime Minister. It says 22 months ago, Boris pledged to fix social care once and for all, and yet we are still waiting. So my question to open the programme to all of you briefly is, will it be fixed once and for all, in the Prime Minister's words, before the next Queen's speech? Liam Fox.
Well, most of the proposals that were set out before don't require primary legislation, so it's not a question of a specific bill other than, I understand, getting some of the administrative elements in place. Clearly, it is a big issue. Clearly, the NHS has been totally overtaken by the COVID crisis. And that, of course, is working its way through the system, but we'll need to get a clear way forward. The demographics of the country require us to be able to provide a solution that is fair and equitable across the generations, that looks after our elderly citizens in a way that they deserve, while making sure that the burden of the cost is spread in a fair and reasonable way. It's not an easy task. If it was, it would have been done by governments over the last 25 years.
Right, so will it be fixed by the next Queen's speech or not?
Well, I think we'll be well on the way to doing that. Whether the system as such will ever be in a state that never has to change again, I doubt very much, as we move forward with changes in medicine, as we deal with multiple pathologies in patients, and we are dealing with all of those. It will obviously be an evolving situation, but from what we hear, yes, I imagine that a combination of regulation and some legislation will be putting us well on the way to having it at least in a shape that most of us can feel proud of. Right.
Lucy, what do you think? Do you think social care will be fixed once and for all by the next Queen's speech?
No, I'm afraid not. I mean, look, I agree with Liam. It is a very difficult, complex issue to crack, but that's why it really does require very strong leadership, relentless focus, bringing together all parties to really resolve this problem in some way, maybe not once and for all, but certainly to make it a lot better than it was. We were promised a plan, a pre-prepared plan, I think Boris said 22 months ago. And in that time, during COVID, really our social care system has been exposed as deeply vulnerable, as fractured, as under-resourced and under-ready to deal with something like coronavirus. So it was urgent before coronavirus. It's even more urgent today, and it will require a great deal more resources than the government are putting into social care at the moment, but it will also require quite a bit of change to the way in which social care is commissioned and is governed and is run in this country in order to get that right.
Fraser?
Well, of course it's not going to be fixed before the next Queen's speech, probably not in this Parliament. To fix such a vast problem is beyond the resources, I think, of this government. The most it can do is try to ameliorate the cost. And even that is hugely controversial. I mean, for example, is there a problem with a millionaire selling their house to pay for the care they need? I mean, to sell your house is not in itself an outrage to pay for the care or to pay for anything else. It depends on the circumstances. Theresa May, remember, thought she'd fix this once and for all in her general election. That cost her her majority. So no matter what solution you reach for, it's so politically controversial that governments just shy away from it time and time again. It's not so long ago since Boris Johnson was promising that he does have a plan.
Yes.
So you'd think he would produce it now if he did. But what happens is when you look at that plan, you see the political cost, and the politicians now, as always, think, maybe now's not the right time.
Right, Pippa, do you agree?
I'm afraid I do agree with both Lucy and Fraser that I don't think we're going to see anything anytime soon, not least because the two key things here are that it has to be a cross-party agreement for all the reasons that Fraser's explained about it being a political hot potato, but also, I mean, I haven't seen any sign of that at all, but also because of the huge resources that have to be put into it, which at any time would be difficult for a government to find, but particularly so as we emerge from the coronavirus pandemic. And this is a failure, yes, as our newspaper has said on the front page today, of Boris Johnson's government. We were told the plan was there, it clearly isn't, but also actually, frankly, of all political parties going back more than a decade. I can remember Tony Blair, Andy Burnham, David Cameron, Theresa May, all telling us that they were going to provide the answers, and for whatever various reasons, they didn't ever come forward. But given Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister now, and given the promises he made almost 2 years ago, I have to say that I think their failure to provide any more detail than 9 words in the Queen's speech is really the epitome of paralysis. And this is politically dangerous for the Prime Minister as well, because he is so we're told that he understands the necessity of delivering on all these promises that he made to voters who, many of whom for the first time, would decided to support the Conservatives at the last election. These voters are going to be judging him not just on whether he delivers on social care, but his so-called levelling up agenda and other matters as well.
Right.
And if he is seen as being dragging his feet and not actually focusing on delivery, that's a big problem for him politically too.
Near paralysis for the government, Liam.
No, I think it's understandable that the NHS has been entirely focused on the COVID pandemic and how we deal with that. There are clearly issues in the NHS still to be dealt with. There'll be a lot of problems, a lot of waiting lists still to work the way through the system. I think a lot of the problems are going to actually be how we integrate this system with other parts of social care and other different budgets that we have. And as pretty much everyone has said, there's a basic problem here, which is that all governments have faced, which is that they have to try to balance two very different principles. One is getting citizens to understand that they need to save for a rainy day, but also protecting enough of their savings to pass on to the next generation to make it worth them saving. So I think that these two tests have always been very difficult. I remember as Shadow Health Secretary way back at the beginning of the Blair government producing a paper on this, and the debate has remained in much the same territory since that. But we do have to find a way forward because, as everyone knows, with an ageing population, the pressures are getting greater year by year.
Right, well, many people have said that over the decades, as you have all alluded to. As expected, the Queen's speech did include a new planning bill to overhaul the planning system in England. Liam Fox, you criticised the government's last attempt at planning reform rather vocally. You said that your constituency had already seen its share of development. What if the government doesn't agree and this bill brings forward plans for more homes in Somerset?
Well, what this bill is intended to produce, I understand, we'll wait to see the details of the bill, is better consultation with local populations, understanding we have to build new houses, but they have to work for not only the new homeowners, but those who live in the area itself. We need to, for example, protect green spaces as well as green belt. We need to be ensuring that we're building more on brownfield sites. That requires more money. The government have said that they will double the amount of money available, for example, for inner cities. And I think we also have to see what the impact of COVID is going to be on our town centres, whether we've got more commercial property that might be turned into residential property, and think creatively about that. We also need to think about the quality of the homes that we build. Are we able to make them carbon neutral, for example, in a reasonable space of time? And also other more human things like the design of our housing that actually makes the housing estate look better than some of the ones that we've seen in recent times.
Right, but it does seem that these are a list of caveats that you and your colleagues are sort of laying down. You're supposed to be the party of home ownership, but you and other Conservative MPs seem to be in the business of frustrating the building of homes in the way you've just outlined.
No, there are plenty of places we can be building in the country. That's one of the reasons that we need better infrastructure.
But not in your part of the country.
No, we all accept that we would get more housing, but there are other restrictions.
But not too many more.
No, but in my constituency, we have constraints like Greenbelt, which we are also, we guarantee to protect. We've got a large amount of land that is floodplain. We don't want to build housing on floodplain because of the insurance problems that we have. We've got a lot of areas of outstanding natural beauty that we're restricted from building on. So we have to be, I think we have to balance the need for more housing that we all want to see. And we must have a much bigger supply of housing. Otherwise, the next generation can't get onto the housing ladder.
Yes.
But it has to work for everyone, and it can't all be crowded into places where there isn't sufficient infrastructure for new residents to be incorporated with decent healthcare and education and emergency services.
All right, well, let's just get down to numbers before I open it up, because you said that 1,700 new houses a year was Alice in Wonderland. You didn't even like 1,200 in your constituency. So how many would be acceptable?
Well, it depends where they put them. For example, if you develop some of the areas in my area, in Weston-super-Mare, for example, you could spend money on rejuvenating parts of the inner town. You could provide more housing without requiring more land to do it. You could be looking at 3-storey houses instead of 2-storey houses. We could be much more creative with what we've got. The point is that targets are set, and then local authorities balance off other elements against the target set by the government. They don't have to build that number of houses, but they have to be able to justify, for example, we've got a lot of green belt or a lot of floodplain, why they can't build houses in that area. That's how local planning should operate. All
right, I'm going to come to you, Lucy, in just a second. But Fraser, just your reaction listening there to Liam Fox about what the government does, what the Conservative Party does in terms of solving this conundrum.
I think that neatly shows the tension there, actually. It's great to want more houses in the abstract, but, you know, the local opposition can be a problem. I mean, Somerset is a beautiful part of the country. I think it's a great shame that more people can't live there. And you know, Bristol nearby, huge housing issues. So you can absolutely see why, you know, Somerset is one of the places that you would think. I certainly would think. I'm a frequent visitor to Somerset. I'd love to see more homes built there. I mean, sure, you need more infrastructure, more GP services and buses, but they can all be provided. Once the planning permission is provided, you can quite easily give people the houses that they need. And that is one part of the country where I think there really is pressure on property.
Right, you must welcome this.
If you want to build more houses in a place that looks nice, you have to make sure there are jobs there as well. Otherwise, you get endless commuting. And you get commuters.
But that's easier now, isn't it, with people working from home or a more hybrid working model?
It might be, and it goes back to the point I made earlier about housing. We have to wait and see some of the patterns that may change in the way that we work and the way that we live post-COVID. I don't think it's clear to any of us exactly what those patterns will yet be.
Do you welcome this bill? This is something you want to see, more houses. You also rejected the government's last attempt to make it easier to build them.
Sorry, was that question to me?
Yes.
Oh, right, sorry. Well, look, I mean, I think the problem we're going to have with this bill is that it's like a developer's charter. There aren't the safeguards there for local residents. And there isn't what we actually need here, which is more strategic place making. People want new communities, not just new homes. And that does mean working more holistically across the system to make sure that we do have sufficient schools, services, the connection to transport, that there are green spaces and so on. And the market alone, just ripping up the rule book of planning regulation, the market alone will not deliver us the kind of high quality, affordable, environmentally friendly homes in the kind of places that we want to live in and people want to live in. And by the way, you know, Manchester's a very beautiful place, a nice place to live. And over the 10, 15-year period, the last few years and the forthcoming few years, there'll be 50,000 new homes in my constituency alone. So that brings with it other challenges as well. But we need local communities, local government to have the powers and resources to do this place planning approach to house building that sits alongside lots of other things.
Pippa, will your readers be impressed by what they've heard?
Well, I think everybody agrees, including our readers, on the need for more homes. I mean, the government's pledges to build hundreds of thousands of new homes a year are so far failing to be met, and house prices are rising. There's also a political imperative for the government as well, because they seem to have identified the fact that homeowners in the North and in the Midlands are possibly more likely to vote Conservative, or could be more likely. So by creating more homeowners, then potentially you're creating a larger pool of voters to support them in future elections. But ultimately, it comes down to whether this is something that communities need as well. And it's a sensitive balance that has to be struck, which is why councils are so crucial to this, to make sure that community desires and needs are not overridden, that it's not by plonking a big development in someone's back garden, but at the same time, the obvious need for more housing is addressed. And it's a really difficult one to do, but I think if you can bring it down as much to the grassroots and the communities and councils and giving them the powers as possible, then that's got to be the best way forward.
Is that the best way, Fraser, or do you see a coalition of Labour and Conservative MPs against what's being proposed?
Yes, but I think they're steadily losing that battle. I mean, if you look, if a Conservative Party, even out of its own narrow self-interest, it will work out that home ownership is the single biggest factor. If you look at the parts of the country where people can't find it difficult to buy a home, that's the party they're most likely to vote Labour. So it's within the Tories' interest here to sort out this problem. It might cause some local difficulty, but of course, I mean, the demographics are quite straightforward. Resisting this will mean eventual extinction for the Conservatives if they're not careful. So I think it really is time to take a more open-minded view and let people live in these wonderful parts of the country like Somerset, where I think we're nowhere near as many houses as there could be.
Oh, what do you think about that, Liam?
Well, Somerset's a very big county.
I was thinking of the near extinction of the Conservative Party that Fraser was talking about.
No, because I think the Conservative Party clearly is the party of home ownership. We have always encouraged it, and we want to see it. We just simply need to have it done in a way that matches the need with the communities already existing. Bristol, for example, has got some very expansive ideas about how they build a new quarter close to Temple Mead Station, which will actually provide very large numbers of housing, a bit like the King's Cross development in London. We've provided something like 1.2 million houses since 2010, since we've been in office. It needs to be more, but there's no doubt about the theory. Of course, we want to see more home ownership, but let's make sure we can provide quality homes for people at a price they can afford and in an environmentally sensitive way, and that doesn't actually make the quality of life for those already living in those communities much more difficult. Right,
but if the Conservatives, Lucy, are building more homes for generation rent, that could be a strong vote winner for them, couldn't it?
Well, I don't think they will be building more homes, and as I say, they're going in the wrong direction with this. The market alone model has not worked. It isn't what people want. It isn't providing the kind of communities that people want to live in, and creating those places and building places, not just through homes but other things as well. So this is really the Tory ideology coming out into the open here, that there is not a belief in a government, active local government working across the piece to more strategically plan for new communities and quality, affordable new homes. Because otherwise, we develop. This is as I say, a developer's charter, but the market alone approach doesn't deliver the number of homes that are needed, and nor does it deliver the affordability levels, the type of housing tenure, and all the other issues that the housing market faces. And that's why what we've seen in recent years is simply a housing market that's getting more and more out of control, prices going higher and higher, and insufficient supply in the system, and not the homes where people actually want to live.
All right, we'll discuss this, I'm sure. Very briefly,
Liam. We wouldn't want to be protecting the green belt and green spaces. If this was market only, we wouldn't be increasing the subsidy for housing in the inner cities, for example. It's not a market only. It's how we get a balance between the need for housing and the types of housing and the existing communities, including giving local government a say.
Right, we're going
to... This bill is going to rip up the rule book when it comes to planning. And we've seen the mistakes of that, haven't we, in the past, with the cladding scandal and all the retro problems that we're now discovering. When you rip up the rule book of regulation, it creates massive problems further up the track, and the government should be taking a completely different approach to creating new homes.
All right, let's talk about another part of the Queen's speech, and that is the future of the Union. We can welcome Pete Wishart, SNP MP and frontbench spokesperson. He's on College Green. Oh, and the sun is shining just by the House of Commons, especially for you. Now, as part of the Queen's speech was an outline of a commitment to strengthen the economic ties across the Union, investing in and improving national infrastructure. You can welcome that, can't you, Pete Wishart?
Well, there is absolutely nothing in this legislative programme that really applies to Scotland will make any sort of difference to the lives of people who live and work in Scotland. I mean, this is a Queen's speech bereft of any real policy making at all. And thank goodness Her Majesty came and there was a bit of pageantry, because that was as dull as last week's dishwater. And it was no surprise that Her Majesty had barely sat down when she was up again. What we need to see in this next period of government is the Scottish Independence Referendum Facilitation Bill, so that Scottish people can get what they decided on a few days ago. We need to start to work with the Scottish Government to ensure that what was delivered is the priorities of the people of Scotland as determined in how they voted last week.
Liam?
The Nicola Sturgeon said that there was no possibility of her wanting a referendum in the first half of this Parliament. Given that this is only a Queen's speech that lasts a year, it had been quite absurd in that case to include such legislation, even if we thought it was justified, which of course we don't, because the SNP told us at the last referendum it was once in a generation. Last time I did my maths, a generation wasn't 7 years.
See, the difference between Liam and I is I have this sort of cute belief in the democracy of the people. The people who determine something in elections should get that. What we delivered last week was a majority of members of Scottish Parliament who are in favour of a referendum for Scotland, for us to be able to decide and determine our own future. Now, it doesn't matter what happened 7 years ago. It doesn't really matter what happened last year. The last electoral event was Thursday last week. And at that election, a majority of people on the list side of the ballot decided that the majority of MSPs were elected on that want an independence referendum. And we secured the biggest number of MSPs ever determined in the whole history of the Scottish Parliament. Now, it's absolutely and abundantly clear that's what the Scottish people want. It is now incumbent upon all of us who are Democrats, regardless whether you're in the Scottish Government or whether you're down here, to deliver what the people voted for. And that has to be central to everything that we do as parliamentarians. We are Democrats. Let's abide and support democracy.
Liam?
Well, there might be a time where we'd have a discussion about that. Both Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson have made it clear the priority is about delivering the recovery from COVID. Nicola Sturgeon says she doesn't want a referendum in the first half of the Scottish Parliament. That's not an issue, therefore, we have to tackle right now. We've got to try to get the economy moving. This particular piece of legislation we're talking about, which replaces EU legislation, will make it easier for us to be able to help small businesses and startups across the United Kingdom. That's the priority. That's the priority Nicola Sturgeon said it was going to be.
Right.
And nobody's arguing with that. I think everybody accepts that what is our priority is dealing with the post-pandemic recovery, ensuring that we're all working together to do that. But what we need to hear, and we've not heard it yet, Michael Gove came some way close to this, is that this UK government accept the result of the Scottish Parliament, that there will be a further independence referendum, and start to make sure that, you know, that's going to be baked in to this next session in Parliament.
Pete, you mentioned Michael Gove. I just want to point to our viewers, as I read to our guests, what Michael Gove, the Cabinet Minister, has been saying in the Times, and this is about spending more money in Scotland. It says, Michael Gove says spending plan adds value to Scotland. We're only about adding value, and far from undermining devolution, I think it's bringing benefits to voters in Scotland and across the United Kingdom. The article reports that Michael Gove is looking at circumventing the Scottish Government and directly implementing free ports in Aberdeen and Inverness, better transport links across the Scottish border, and more money for Scottish universities and science. More money for Scotland, Pete Wishart. As a Scottish MP, you must just welcome that straightforwardly.
Absolutely. More money for Scotland, please, and we welcome it.
Right.
But it's, what the point, though, is, Joe, is who determines what the priorities of the people of Scotland are? Is it the democratically elected Scottish Parliament that went to all this trouble electing with the record turnout? Or is it UK ministers telling Scotland what is good for them and determine these priorities themselves? Now, it should be the Scottish Parliament. They are responsible for these particularly obligations, and it should be them that decide and determine how that extra funding is spent, not Michael Gove, not his ministers.
Right, well, Liam, why should it be Michael Gove and Boris Johnson who make those decisions about how money is spent in Scotland?
because there are elements for which the Scottish Government is responsible and elements for which the UK Government is responsible. We have devolved government. We don't have a federal system of government in this country. And I think it's great that we're able to spread the opportunities that we've got from Brexit to all parts of the United Kingdom, getting rid of some of that archaic EU law and providing greater flexibility in it. And I think that that's one of the great pluses, a bit like the fact that we were able to get the vaccine programme moving across the whole United Kingdom because of the actions of the government at Westminster being far-sighted enough to buy the vaccines, which benefited England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. That's what we get from being a United Kingdom.
Pete?
Well, yeah, I mean, nobody's disputing the success of the vaccine programme, but that's mainly down in Scotland to the Scottish NHS. We've done a fantastic job in delivering this. But the key point in principle
Scottish NHS didn't buy any vaccine.
The key point in principle exists is who determines what the priorities of the Scottish people are. A government that we just voted for in record numbers, or Michael Gove, Boris Johnson and his ministers. Now, if you were to put that question to the Scottish people, I could tell Liam Fox exactly what that answer will be. It will be Scottish ministers who have just been elected with a record mandate, with a record number of people voting for them, not Michael Gove.
Right. Well, while we're talking about spending, I just want to point viewers to look at this particular figure here about public spending. It's from the Office for National Statistics. It's total public spending per person in different parts of the UK. Now, in Scotland, which of course includes Pete Wishart's constituents, nearly £14,500 is spent per year, per head. That's actually the second highest of any national region in the UK, just behind Northern Ireland. In the northwest of England, which includes Lucy Powell's constituents in Manchester, a lot less is spent, just under, actually, £13,000 per person. And in the southwest, including Liam Fox's constituents in Somerset, even less is spent, nearly £12,500 per person. Liam Fox, bearing in mind those figures I've just read out, is the union remaining together a good deal for your constituents in Somerset?
Yes, because the union has a lot of benefits that go beyond just spending per head. I don't think any of us object to more money being spent where it's needed to be spent. So if, for example, you've got parts of Glasgow, you've got some of the most deprived communities in Europe. No one objects to that spending. And if we move spending from one half of the country to another, that is a good thing. That's one of the things we can achieve as a union. I think that what we would be certainly questioning is why is it that with that extra spending, pupils in Scotland have fallen behind in the international league tables? Why are drug deaths in Scotland 3 times the size of drug deaths in England and the highest in Europe? Why have we had so many policy failures from the SNP government, given that they get all that extra money? I think that's the real question they have to answer. Right.
Lucy, what about you? Your constituents could do with a bit of extra money, I'm sure. You get a bit more than those in the southwest, but still not as high as Scotland.
Well, look, I think there are 2 issues with the sort of shared prosperity fund and this bill that's being announced here. First is that it needs to follow need.
Just to respond to the figures that I've read out, for the northwest of England, just under £13,000 per person, compared to nearly £14,500 in Scotland.
Well, I think government spending on per head and that kind of thing needs to follow need. And you know, I don't have a problem with that. And probably in Liam Fox's part of the world, there is less need than there is in my part of the world or parts of Scotland as well. But I think, you know, the point being, it does need to follow need. It shouldn't be following political objectives, which is part of the problem I've got with this current government. They're doing that when it comes to things like the town fund and the levelling up fund and so on. Piecemeal pockets of money that aren't strategic, aren't following necessarily need, but are following political objectives. And it feels to me like the announcements today in the Queen's speech in relation to Scotland and Wales are about a political desire instead. And I think it will backfire, because I think trying to sideline the Scottish government at this moment in time by deciding spending priorities in areas which have for many years been devolved, like higher education, for example, in Scotland, I think will backfire and is actually the opposite of what we need in terms of keeping that union together, which is what we want to see.
Fraser, will it backfire?
I very much doubt it, and I don't recognise this vision of Scotland that Pete Wishart's talking. To talk to him as if the whole of Scotland is itching for a referendum. In fact, the SNP actually got fewer votes than Alex Salmond got 10 years ago, fell short of the majority, and the polls show that the independence model he talks about, most voters don't want that either. The polls have sunk right back down to pretty much where they were at the last referendum. So of course, and that's because the majority of Scots are happy with the current system, where yes, the SNP, whoever's in the Scottish Parliament, runs public services, but then the UK government, we pool the resources to come up with things like the furlough scheme that's been a lifeline to so many Scots, like the vaccination programme done on a UK basis. Scotland has got one of the highest levels of vaccination in the whole of Europe. There's no way that would be the case if it wasn't plugged in to the UK scheme, the most successful scheme in the whole of Europe. And yes, of course, there's more that the UK government can do for all of the UK in these various regions, and most people are happy with that. So this is why Nicola Sturgeon isn't wanting a referendum now. First of all, she's should probably lose it. And, this is why it's so strange hearing Pete thinking that there should be a referendum bill in the Queen's speech. Nicola Sturgeon has told us she doesn't want one right now. So I really can't, there's lots of sort of faux outrage here. And this is, I guess, the SNP's game, to act as if Scotland's absolutely chomping at the bit to get independence. In fact, the support for independence has gone nowhere in the last 6 years.
All right.
The SNP has gone backwards since Alex Salmond's day. It's not a particularly encouraging outlook as far as the SNP is concerned.
Pete, I know there's a lot for you to respond there, but can you also include, as you are responding in your answer, about the point that Liam Fox made, which is about the public spending, that in his view, despite more per head going to people in Scotland, public services aren't up to scratch, that they failed, things like drug deaths?
Well, isn't it a sad indictment that we're actually talking about having to subsidise Scotland per head of population because of the relative failure of Scotland within their union? I mean, that tells me everything about what's going wrong with the union.
But the SNP has been in government for a very long time.
But like, we're getting told we're getting subsidised from the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, resourceful, rich Scotland, with some of the most... the nation that practically invented the modern world, to try and suggest that somehow we require subsidies in order to continue to survive and to prosper is absolute and utter nonsense. And all this demonstrates is why Scotland needs the real powers of an independent nation to ensure that we can have the progress and take the type of country forward in our image and how we want to do this according to the values of our people. This subsidy stuff has been kicking around since the 1970s. It's been debunked so many times, and it always amazes me that we keep on coming back to this absolute and utter rubbish that keeps getting given to us time and time again. Scotland would survive and be prosper as an independent nation, and I don't think there's anybody that would disagree with that, given the natural and personal resources of our nation.
All right, well, we won't do a brief poll, but Pete Wishart, thank you very much there outside the House of Commons. Pippa, you'll have heard Gordon Brown talking about muscular unionism not being the right way to sort of push ahead to persuade Scots to remain as part of the UK, those who would like to see independence. But what about voters in England? Do you think they'll think it's unfair that there is more spending per head for people in Scotland?
No, I think overall, people in Britain, like some of your panellists have already said, understand the importance of putting money in where the need is greatest, and that works right across the country. There's a sort of perception that London is sort of metropolitan elite and everyone is wandering along streets paved with gold. But of course, London has some of the most deprived parts of the country as well. And I think that anybody that understands the nature of our constitutional alliance is absolutely fine about the money going where it's needed most. I think what's interesting when it comes to the Queen's speech and the UK subsidy bill is that what we're led to believe is that while the government said that it's going to replace EU funding, there's not going to be an increase in subsidies. It's going to be sort of a funneling, if you like, of the cash to places they regard it as most important. So I expect we will see bits of the north and a bit north of England, I should say, and bits of the Midlands benefiting from that, and possibly the southeast, which is regarded as both which is wealthier, but also is regarded as less politically urgent by the government, not benefiting from that so much. So while they have the freedom to do more with state subsidies, I think we're actually probably not going to see more cash overall in the funding envelope. And when it comes to muscular unionism, I mean, I'm very struck by how divided Scotland is on this. You've got a third of people that want an independence referendum, and you've got a third of people that don't. And you've got a third of people in the middle who, quite frankly, are fed up with the division and want to concentrate on the pandemic, concentrate on building public services, and might be up for the argument for the debate in a few years' time, but not right now.
All right.
And you know, we all remember the latest big constitutional wrangle we had with Brexit, where initially at the beginning of that process, the country was divided into those three bits. So it's the middle ones that are kind of going to be the ones that decide this either way. And you know, I predict that this is going to be the biggest constitutional question that we're going to face for the rest of this parliament. It's going to dominate the rest of this parliament.
All right.
This isn't going away anytime soon.
We're going to stick with you, Pippa, to talk us through the latest in terms of the Labour Party and the fallout from the shadow cabinet reshuffle and potential tension and unrest between Keir Starmer and his deputy, Angela Rayner. Can you take us through that?
Yes, well, I mean, obviously it's all peace in our time now, isn't it? I mean, I think Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner were spotted in Portcullis House having a very public cup of coffee yesterday to try and persuade everybody that they're great friends after all. But clearly this is something which has been bubbling away for some time. They're very different approaches to the Labour Party's problems, and their teams represent quite different wings of the Labour Party. And whatever their sort of personal chemistry and however well they individually get on, clearly the allies are set up against one another. And, you know, we've had lots of stuff from Angela Rayner's allies about how potentially she could have launched some leadership bid and, you know, had the support within the unions and the parliamentary party to oust Keir Starmer after the results of the weekend. I mean, yeah. I don't think that either that would have happened or indeed that the support was there for that to happen. But you've also had people around Keir Starmer very unhappy with the way they see Angela Rayner has been you know, making sort of public statements on everything from, you know, the elections to social care and so on, and don't think she necessarily has been fulfilling the role that she was supposed to be doing as well as she might have been. So, you know, those continue to bubble away beneath the surface.
Right, let me just spring this on you because this tweet has just landed in front of me from the political correspondent at The Times, Henry Zeffman. Carolyn Harris, Keir Starmer's parliamentary private secretary, has resigned amid claims she spread baseless rumours about Angela Rayner's private life. So perhaps peace in our time has been rather short-lived, Pippa.
Possibly. And Carolyn Harris, I mean, I've not seen this story, but Carolyn Harris is, of course, one of Keir Starmer's closest friends in Parliament. She uses PPS, but the families sort of spend time together socially and be on a holiday together, know each other very well. You know, if she's, I mean, I've got no idea about the specific allegations that she's allegedly been, you know, spreading, but certainly it doesn't suggest that there's a huge amount of trust between the two.
Well,
and that's just not good. I mean, the public, let's face it, the public is fed up with divided parties. Labour has had too much division in recent years. It needs to get over itself and concentrate on the needs of the voters rather than internal wranglings.
Lucy, the truce is over by the looks of it.
I don't think so. I'm not sure what that relates to, but it may be something.
Well, but that's a high-level resignation from within Keir Starmer's core team.
Well, I don't know. So let's just see. But maybe that was something, you know, as a result from things that happened over the weekend. But I mean, look, let's be honest. You know, those kind of tittle-tattle things that sort of come out slowly over a few days, as we saw over the weekend, you know, it isn't the best version of ourselves, and it's not the kind of version of ourselves that I think we want to repeat all too often. But in politics, I think fundamentally you get tested on the big questions of the day and not on these sorts of issues. And you know, what I have taken from some of the changes that Keir has made following the elections, which were a disappointment to us, and what I heard at yesterday's shadow cabinet was a leader who wanted to make clearer the political direction of the party.
Right,
and I think if I would point you to one thing, I would point you to my good friend, who is absolutely excellent, Shabana Mahmood, and her appointment to the National Campaign Coordinator. And she's been given a clear mandate to implement the Labour Together review of the election that was published this time last year, which I was a co-author of as well. And that laid clear that
Yeah.
the route to a victory for the Labour Party and what the country wants from the Labour Party
yes.
is one that offers
Well, Lucy, let me-
transformational change, especially on the economy.
Well, let
and
me
that's what
interrupt
Keir
because
set out yesterday.
we haven't got too much longer. Well, perhaps as her first act, it will be putting a working class candidate to stand in Batley and Spen. Let me just show you this article in the HuffPost. Labour's Batley and Spen candidate must be working class, Keir Starmer told Ian Lavery, John Trickett and Laura Smith, who all had high-profile jobs under Jeremy Corbyn's time, draw battle lines as fallout from Hartlepool defeat continues. Now, this is because Labour's Tracy Brabin, who was the MP there, has won the West Yorkshire mayoral race, so there's going to be a by-election. Do you agree with them, Lucy? Does it have to be a working class candidate?
Well, I would prefer it to be a local candidate. I think that's always the best approach in these things. But as I say, if you look at the long-term trends that have affected Labour's voter coalition, and were laid out very clearly in that report that we published this time last year, it's the divisions in Labour, or the indications of how you might vote in politics these days, are a lot less about class, and they're much more about age and education and geography.
Well,
and it's those issues that we need to address. I know I've hardly had a chance to say anything. And so I think that's what we've got to look at. I want a good local candidate.
Well, of
but
course.
as I say, Keir Starmer is now making very clear that he wants to go in a direction of travel that is Labour offering that transformational change that people want to see in their daily lives, with good, decent jobs and opportunities in their local areas. And we are going to be focused on bringing forward an agenda that addresses those priorities of people, and not this sort of infighting and talking in on ourselves.
Fraser?
I think it's striking that when Keir Starmer tried to move against Angela Rayner, he felt quite a quick and immediate counterattack, and in the end, it's him that's ended up losing his. Like Caroline Harris was his eyes and ears in the party. Now she's the one who's ended up walking the plank. In many ways, I think the problem Keir Starmer's facing are not of his making. Labour's problems have been a long, long time in Hartlepool and other parts of the country where his vote share has been going down. But what we're seeing now is how he, as a leader, is really struggling to assert his control over the rest of the parliamentary party. You could see a lot of this in Parliament yesterday, the way that MPs were wandering around the place being openly critical of him. And I think that is perhaps his immediate problem, just trying to regain his control over the party he's supposed to be leading.
Right. Well, I mean, just to point to something here, Liam Fox, that you've written for on the Conservative Home website this week, that Labour must learn to love Brexit. Isn't it important, though, that politicians are principled? If they said they love Brexit and they don't, then you'd accuse them of being inauthentic.
What I meant was they need to actually want to make it work now. The decision's been taken. We've left the European Union. If they constantly hark back to these divisions that existed before, they're not going to progress. Keir Starmer is a weak leader of a party that doesn't seem to know what it is. I mean, people knew what Harold Wilson's Labour Party was. It was a patriotic, aspirational party. They knew what Tony Blair's Social Democratic Labour Party was. They knew what Jeremy Corbyn's horrendous hard left Labour Party was, and they got their just desserts for that. But the public, I would think, know what Keir Starmer's Labour Party is for. And oppositions do well when governments are not doing well, and the opposition provides a clear narrative. The government is doing well, and the opposition don't seem to know what they're for, other than...
All right, let's put that back to... But, Lucy, do you think that is what you have to do? Not just accept Brexit, say it's done and move on, but actually say you would make a success of it as the Labour Party?
Yes, I do actually. And I think that is what we have been saying. Keir actually said that yesterday when he spoke at the Shadow Cabinet. We need to lay out how we can succeed, and we will succeed in a sort of post-pandemic, post-Brexit context. And there are huge opportunities for our country in that, opportunities which I'm afraid this Conservative Party are not seizing. The opportunities for the transition to green in some of our key industries, from steel, car manufacturing, aerospace and so on, which do require active government working in partnership with business to create jobs and transition. And that's what Keir Starmer wants to do. He wants to fundamentally reshape the economy of this country so that we are at the front of the race when it comes to these new jobs of the future. And I don't believe that the Conservatives have an agenda, a real agenda for that. They talk the talk, but they just don't walk the walk.
All right, that's all we've got time for. Thank you to all of my guests today. Day of a very pared-down Queen's speech outlining the government's priorities for the year ahead. There's no Prime Minister's questions tomorrow, so I will be back at the usual time of 12:15. Please join me then. Bye-bye.